All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. And of course, if you have been following at home, we are getting deeper into the world of AI and AI Control Tower here at ServiceNow. And the big question always comes up of where's AI going and how do we help do good AI and responsible AI? And that, of course, means regulations. And on this episode, we've got some of our experts who have helped build responsible AI and can answer some of those legal questions because we've got some upcoming events like the EU AI Act and the Colorado's algorithmic discrimination law. And we're going to learn more about that too. And then, of course, NIST. And joining us on the show, we've got three great experts from ServiceNow, and we're going to have them introduce themselves and get to know them a little bit better through the show.
Hi, Bobby. My name is Andrea LaFontain. I'm the director of AI legal at ServiceNow. Nice to see you.
It's great to have you because this is the hard part because this is where it gets legal. So everyone starts to kind of, tense up a little bit. But I know our next guest, Ken Miller, you're going to make that so much easier for us, right?
Oh, I don't know about that. But so my name is Ken Miller. I'm the senior director of product legal here at ServiceNow. I work with Andrea and Navdeep on a whole bunch of AI legal issues.
And of course, our last guest here is Navdeep Gill, who is part of the responsible AI team here at ServiceNow. How are you, Navdeep?
Hey, yeah, glad to be here. Yeah, so my name is Navdeep Gill. I'm a staff senior product manager at ServiceNow, and most of my work focuses on responsible AI and AI governance.
So this is going to be really interesting because this is the part I know everybody's always thinking about with the future of AI, all of the glitter and amazing stuff, but how do we do it right? Enterprises face this fascinating problem, and there's different regulatory philosophies attacking that same issue. Explain those three philosophies we're going to talk about today.
So I think we're going to focus on three today, but we'll caveat that there are many, many more out there, right? This is like a very booming area of law. So I think the EU AI Act, that's the biggest one, right? It's very risk-based. And I think it's considered really like at the forefront of AI regulation, right? It's the first one with teeth. The Colorado AI Act is another one that's pretty focused on discrimination, preventing discrimination, consequential decisions. But I'll note many more state laws are coming out, right? We see a bunch in California, but Colorado is certainly one that's gotten a lot of press. And then in the U.S., we have the NIST framework, which is not a law, it's not a regulation, but it's a voluntary framework. A lot of companies have adopted it, and it's been pretty central to a lot of, you know, key regulations like Colorado, right?
We have a lot of these laws and a lot of these regulations, a lot of guidances we're coming up with. So how do you comply with prescriptive EU rules and these principles-based laws like Colorado simultaneously? Can you do that? Is that a possible thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly really complicated, right? I'd say the breadth of emerging AI regulations is pretty similar to what we saw when GDPR came down in 2018 to regulate personal data. You had GDPR being kind of like this big central important law, and then after that, you had a lot of nations and U.S. states passing their own legislation, some very similar to GDPR and some following a very different framework. So I think this problem, this issue of having lots of different emerging regulations is something we've seen before, and the approach doesn't really change, right? So similar to what we saw with GDPR, the EU passed the EU AI Act. So for a lot of companies, it makes sense to use the EU AI Act to set your internal compliance goals. And I think from then, you would track subsequent regulations that your organization might be subject to. And then you would try to measure the delta between those regulations and the EU AI Act, right? And then you would do an assessment to determine, does your organization have controls in place to meet that new regulation, or do you need to go back and tweak things and build additional controls? And so I think when you break it down like that, it's a bit easier to attack. But I think kind of like, using this approach of like measuring the delta when new regulations come out, it's a pretty common scalable approach to emerging regulation.
Just to layer on what Andrea said there, I think that, ServiceNow is obviously dealing with this problem ourselves internally. And, one of the core ways we're doing that, core things we have to do is be able to visualize these these regulations, the requirements that exist under them, and your own compliance programs and action items that you have. And I think the ServiceNow AI Control Tower helps quite a bit on that front.
Andreas set up some of these different philosophies, and I want to ask you about NIST or the NIST updates and their framework. How does that change someone's compliance? Does it change it overnight?
When it comes to the changes they make, when it comes to like responsible AI or AI risk management or anything, it's not really, we don't really make those changes overnight. They kind of have to be triaged. We have to really try to understand what these changes are. And also, we have to try to map those to say customers, like customer contracts and like other laws that are in place. Because, like mentioned earlier, the the frameworks that they put out there are voluntary. We don't necessarily have to follow them, but they are best practices. And for most of the industry, they do understand some of those concepts. So by us, tacking on to what they're trying to put out there in terms of best practices, that'll put us in a good position overall, not just with customers, but just our overall posture when it comes to AI.
So, Ken, I want to ask you a quick question, and please correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of times we hear um, safe harbor thrown around, and I know that's not correct, but we're also talking about regulations and thinking ahead. How does that all play into this philosophy and our thinking when it comes to regulations?
When you're thinking about your compliance programs today, where we are with respect to regulations on AI, we're still in early days. Lots of regulations still being published. I think California puts out a new one almost every day, it seems like. And so something like the NIST management framework is going to be an important reference point for regulators as they build out regulations and write new and try to mitigate risk with AI. And so using that framework as a tool for your own compliance program, building compliance mechanisms that are sort of tailored to it will should put you in a good position for what may come, though none of us know quite exactly what may come.
Right, right. And that's again, I mean, we are talking about AI Control Tower here, this great flagship product here at ServiceNow that helps find all of that AI that's floating around. I mean, we've talked about it on one of our last episodes that everybody's using AI. So one person might be using some small tool, you might be using an agency, you might be using agents, you might be building something homegrown, and all this has to be found. And it's embedded in our CRMs, it's embedded in our security cameras. Every vendor's AI is part of a compliance burden. Navdeep, can you speak to the math on this? Just how big are we really talking?
The math on this can be, pretty large, pretty exponential, depending upon the size of the organization and what type of AI is being used, for example. So you can imagine a situation where, let's say, it's a big company, they've deployed like 100 AI systems for various use cases. They already have 100 out there, right? Now, each one, since it's deployed into the real world, there will be legislation attached to each one, most likely, depending upon what regions they deploy in. So now you're at, obviously a larger number. You have to worry about what you've deployed from just like engineering quality standpoint, but now there's this whole compliance factor as well. And also, in addition to that, a lot of times, especially today, like with Gen AI and everything, employees are using AI tools all the time for, being productive. You have to account for that too, to a certain degree. And then, a lot of companies use third parties all the time for other things. If AI is embedded in there, I don't want to say you're fully responsible, but there is something that, falls on your lap in that point as well, depending upon how you use that tool. So it's exponential. It's exponential 100%.
Well, that brings us to that other legal question. I want to come back to you, Ken. And how can you limit your risk of exposure when you have all these AI systems embedded in your enterprise?
In addition to sort of the inventory and knowing what you have, you also kind of need policies and SOPs around how you're going to procure your AI from vendors, and then how you're going to use it internally. I mean, so for example, one thing you might want to put in place is as a process for identifying tools that might be put in place for what the EU AI Act would consider a high risk use case. internally, and then identify the stakeholders who are going to be tasked with conducting assessment of your use of those tools and make sure that your use complies with the regulation and is done responsibly. You also probably want to have policies around the purposes for which your data can be used by these external AI vendors. In particular, answering the question: is your okay with AI vendors? Is your organization okay with your vendors using your data to improve models? And if so, in what cases are you okay with that? And what limitations should be in place around that use?
It sounds like there's actually a lot of control being created or at least thought about early on now that we're all, you know, neck deep in AI, it seems like. Is that a correct way of looking at it?
Being proactive, being on your front foot, is just extremely important for every organization at this stage where AI really does. It does feel like AI is in almost all your products now, or and if it's not today, it's coming. So the time is now to sort of address these questions for yourself.
That I want to ask you about, Navdeep, because this is where, you as the ServiceNow responsible AI expert, how does our automated discovery and control tower locate this AI within our enterprise and of course our customers' enterprise?
Yeah, so within the AI control tower itself, you can kind of think about it as like a smart home where it kind of detects all these different AI sources that you have through connectors. So major connectors like AWS Bedrock or Azure, things like that. AI control tower has a way to connect to these providers, and with that, we can get access to the agents you have, the models, the data sets, everything, and all of that gets imported into the AI control tower. So by doing that, you get full visibility, not just into what you have running from ServiceNow, but what you have running, overall. So your whole AI picture is being shown to you on this monitor on a daily basis, which allows you to keep track of things when it comes to risk, performance, anything of that nature. We enable that for you with AI Control Tower.
So obviously we know that good governance makes deployment just work better, and of course automation is the key. That's really what ServiceNow is all about. How does that architecture work, or what are some of the things we need to think about when it comes to this architecture? Now, Deep.
Yeah, when it comes to like using governance to kind of accelerate everything of that, like you do need to think about this whole universal discovery, which is what we were just talking about. You need to understand that when it comes to certain legislation, it'll vary across regions, so you need to account for that, and you need to account for that in your AI systems and your documentation, your compliance. You kind of have to have like policy as code, so like rules that can kind of enforce themselves, and then continuous compliance. So by that, what I mean is it's not enough to just be compliant at this particular point in time. You have to be proactive about keeping track of these legal changes that are happening all the time. Like we just talked about how California is always having things come out. The EU AI Act kind of does like a rolling type of update. So like they had requirements for 2025 and now there are more requirements for 2026. So 2025 really focused on models, for example. So imagine you're a company, you really focus on the models you're developing. For 2026, they're shifting to AI systems. So these are systems that utilize AI. So now your company has to worry about that now, which is a different set of requirements, a different type of things you have to keep track of. So you can imagine that if you don't have this automated in a certain way, you're just going to slow yourself down.
Well, this does bring another question of, does platform governance create its own risks? Is
You know,
it's who's auditing all of this automation?
anytime you have automation built into anything, it has its own risk, even with any type of governance that you're using in your platform. So there could be things around, like for example, you have guardrails. Guardrails are great, but they can age over time. You know, any type of logic you have that's kind of like a black box, that's not that great either. Like you could have rules in place for some type of compliance, but someone should be able to explain those rules. Things around, data access, things like that. There's this concept of like, alert fatigue, where if you have an alert system set up for your AI system, it might be so sensitive you're getting alerts all the time about issues when in reality, I mean, no one can keep up with that type of stuff. So overall, this type of platform governance and automated factor is if it's a black box, it can cause a lot of issues. What you really need to do is have clear owners of different components of your governance system. So there are product owners, there's compliance, there's legal, there could be like QE, just engineering in general. Anyone that works on the AI components of your products, you know, you have to have these various owners that can keep track of what they're responsible for. Overall, it's a team effort at the end of the day.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say seems like a new team of experts really working together to push all of this AI forward in the most responsible way, correct?
If organizations can find a way to have these teams across whatever they're deploying, they will be able to move faster. I know there's this concept of governance slowing things down, but in reality, what it's doing, it's avoiding you running into hurdles later on in time when it could be too late. If you hit a hurdle with the system that you deployed, it's a lot more difficult to deal with than hitting that hurdle internally at your desk. It's going to be a different outcome, and it's going to be a lot harder when it's out there in the real world.
Well, that brings up a question for you, Andrea. We've got a timeline coming. There's a lot of things on the horizon. Can you give us just a few things we need to think about going forward?
Sure. I mean, Navdeep touched on kind of the staggered nature of compliance deadlines for the EU AI Act. So kind of the big one that we're worried about next is August 2026. We talked about the Colorado AI Act. That's got a June 2026 deadline for enforcement. We're kind of seeing what else is going to get passed. Obviously, there are a lot of state laws. We talked about California. We've talked about NIST, but that's already in place. But everybody's looking out to see, will there be, a comprehensive U.S. federal AI law, or will there be a state, moratorium, a law a state moratorium on state. Oh, sorry, federal moratorium on state law.
I have a question because I know this comes up anytime you think about regulations and legal. We're always like, well, what if I don't do it? Or what if I do it after something kind of bad happened, or it wasn't that bad? What do I really need to do? How do you set this up, or can you set this up afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, you can you can wait until after your first violation, right? I mean, and I think like that is an approach a company may take. There is something to be said for waiting to see how a regulator is going to enforce a new regulation. But you probably don't want your company to be the first test case for that regulatory enforcement, right? It can be very expensive. Like new AI Act fines can be pretty high. And then, having that fine on your company can also cause a loss of trust with your customers. And even if you don't get cited by a regulator, right? Chances are your customers, your partners, your investors, your board members, they're going to want to understand what you're doing to ensure you're deploying AI responsibly, right? And so I think for these reasons, it makes sense to try to take reasonable steps to build out your governance infrastructure proactively. I think it makes sense for any company that's leveraging AI, which is pretty much every company at this point.
So there you have it. A great primer, so to speak, on understanding these AI regulations that are coming up and what you need to do to take care of them, and just how AI Control Tower fits well into your organization. I want to thank our guests, Andrea LaFontain, Ken Miller, and Navdeep Gill. I'm your host, Bobby Brill, and thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about, check the show notes below. Thanks for listening.